Welcome to The Skinny for Friday, January 10th, 2025. It's bad to be skinny this morning. My name is Ray Roa. I'm the editor-in-chief at 36-year-old Alternative Weekly Creative Loafing, Tampa Bay. I'm joined in studio by Pulitzer-nominated journalist, author, and also boat captain Ben Montgomery. How are you, Ben?
Hey, I'm good, Ray. It's cold out there.
2 out of 4 people in this room have beanies on right now. What is it like on the boat when it's this cold?
It's chilly on the boat. It's chilly, my friend, but I have a Western mountaineering sleeping bag that just keeps me nice and cozy. But I was just going to say, we look cool. Like, winter weather rolls around, and let me just the men of Tampa. Let's just stick to the men of Tampa. Really bring it, fashion-wise. Like, you're looking.
I got
so
a comment
cool
from
right
my
now.
wife on
you're
my
really
cold weather
cool,
attire.
Skip's over here, looking cool, although not that different from normal. I saw Sean with a really fashionable scarf.
Scarf. Yes, I saw the scarf as well.
Anyways,
Chris
I
is
want to
looking
say,
good in there too.
Great job, guys. Like, good job. I'm sure the women are doing fine, but great job bringing it this holiday season, guys. With the cold weather, you're looking really good out there. I sub occasionally at Orange Grove Middle Magnet School, and a young woman this past semester, she taught me something called Fit Check.
Oh yeah,
you've heard, know this. I'm sure this is old news, but I'm 40. I'm about to be 47. I'm just now learning about this, but she tells me, Fit Check, what is that? You have to describe like what you're wearing, say where it's from, and sort of you run through what you have on. And so, anyways, Fit Check.
Fit Check
Ray.
for me, Saucony hand-me-downs from Red, White, and Blue, care of Anthony Carbone at Creative Loafing. But yeah, I'm outfitted. I'm outfitted nice.
You got the blue. You're just.
Blue
anyways,
jeans.
Everybody in the room's looking cool. Great job.
It's
man.
nice to be chilly a little bit, and our guest is looking great too. By the way, we're missing our compadre, Florida Phoenix senior reporter Mitch Perry. He's out covering today's Hillsborough County legislative delegation meeting. Later on the show, we'll talk to University of South Florida geography professor Dr. Chris Mindell about Sulphur Springs. But right now, we're here live in the studio. 721 days until 2027. That's important because that's the year Tampaños will select a new mayor to succeed Tampa Mayor Jane Castor, who won re-election in 2023 but is termed out. 721 days might seem a long time, especially in politics. But our guest this morning is an early bird, and he is looking great also in his cold weather gear. And last Thursday, he filed his statement of candidacy to run for mayor of Tampa. Alan Henderson, welcome to the Skinny and WMNF. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Alan, it's been a week since you filed. Is this thing in the bag? Is that how it goes?
Well, you said 721 days?
Yeah.
I was like, is it that soon already? No, we have a lot of important work to do, but I'm encouraged by the momentum we've seen early.
That's awesome. I'm going to get right to
why so early? Sorry, why so early? Can you step into that?
We realized, one, it's a pretty pragmatic time. A lot of the young leaders are starting to step up. You see like Anna Escamani in Orlando, and different people around the country are sort of activated now with a sense of urgency. And so as far as like the pragmatic side of it, though, I have like a name ID to build. I have to sort of prove my efficacy in this space if I'm going to be a serious candidate. And so we figured it'd take about 2 years.
And years. Let's talk about years. I'm going to get right to the most striking thing about your candidacy right off the bat. I looked it up, Alan. We have the same birthday, February 6th.
No kidding. Okay.
I'll be 40 next month, but you'll be turning 24.
Yes, sir.
Still, if elected, you would not be the city's youngest mayor. Jennifer Dietz, archives and records manager at the city of Tampa, chimed in on a social media post I have about you and said that James Edgar Lipscomb, is that how you would say that, Ben?
Lipscomb.
The 13th mayor of Tampa. He served from 1873 to 1876. He was 23 years old when he was sworn in.
Ooh, okay.
And so you won't be the youngest.
I won't be the youngest.
But I'll tell you, if he is elected, Alan would be Tampa's first black mayor. And we still couldn't find black candidates who had run for mayor, right? We couldn't figure that out.
We did. I managed to see one. I'm not sure how much success he's had in his campaign. but I feel like I'm amongst good company.
Right on. And as you mentioned, young folks are obviously getting into politics. In Orlando, also, there's U.S. Representative Maxwell Frost, elected at age 25. He's the first Gen Z member of the United States Congress. He'll turn 28 in a week. Last week on this show, we had Jaden Donofrio, I think I'm saying that right, on the show. He's a 20-year-old running for vice chair of the Florida Democratic Party. And I talked a little bit with Luis Salazar, who is the president of Hillsborough County's LGBTQ plus caucus. He turned 43 yesterday, by the way. Happy birthday, Luis. And only because he had yet to get to know you, and I know you've met him since, Luis stopped short of saying he could support you fully as this candidate, but because he wanted to get to know you. But he was very encouraging of you entering this race as a young person. He even said he was optimistic, and he said you were smart to get in early. And I could go on and on about what I think about you after the few times I've talked to you, who I think you are. But could you introduce yourself to listeners? Tell them who you are.
Yeah, and let me start by saying I really do appreciate the platform. I'm a Tampa native. I was born in Tampa General. My first job was at Burns Steakhouse, the Harry Watt Dessert Room.
Doing what?
I was a host.
Oh.
I was a host up there with that team.
Favorite dessert?
Oh, great question. Bananas Foster.
Okay.
Yeah.
Especially when they come in there and they, do the little flambe. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Went to school, HCC, before I had an opportunity, in Dale Mabry, before I had an opportunity to receive a tuition discount at Harvard. So now I'm at the Kennedy School of Government there. My first class is on the 18th. And I'm excited. I'm excited by just to channel what I'm learning. I know it's not so much about where I've learned, but what I've learned and how I can put that to work here in Tampa.
Very cool.
By the way, if you're just joining us on The Skinny, that voice you're hearing belongs to Alan Henderson, who last week became the first person to enter the 2027 Tampa mayoral race. If you call us at the studio at 813-239-9663, Irene, we'll get you in queue to ask Alan a question. You can text us 813-433-0885 or email dj@wmnf.org. Alan, we talked about Jaden Donofrio, Congressman Frost.
Such a smart kid. I had an opportunity to talk to Jaden.
Oh, you did?
I did.
You've talked to Jaden. Okay. Jaden is awesome. So these guys, Frost, Jaden. So Frost was an activist before he got elected. Jaden, he ran this Future Leaders Packet, raised $1 million last year.
You with us last week on
He was
The
with us
Skinny?
last week
No
here
kidding.
on the show. And even Lipscomb, that mayor, his father was a council member and had a store downtown. But as far as local politics go, Alan, you came out of nowhere for me, right? And you emailed me like over the break, and I was like, what is going on here? And it was hard for me to find folks in the political world who had heard of you.
Sure.
We talked about Lewis from the LGBTQ plus caucus in Hillsborough. He told me you came out to the meeting. You've expressed to me not just your deep respect, not just that respect you have for elected officials, but also this desire to get out there and connect with people. Can you talk about how your outreach has been going since you announced, and a little bit about, who talked to you before jumping in this race?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been motivated by the positive reception so far. And quite frankly, that's sort of the ethos of Tampa, is that the people here are incredible. And so I wasn't necessarily nervous about being an outsider. Quite frankly, I thought that was a potential benefit. But certainly it means I have to start meeting and learning about the way the city works so we can build on top of it. I have a really great campaign team that we're building. It's going to be a 90-person operation by the time it's all said and done. These guys are policy advocates. These guys are deep researchers, really astute people who are helping me form tough, pragmatic questions to ask the city officials. And so over the course of the next few weeks, I'm looking forward to kind of channeling their insights into real movement for the people here.
And just 90 people. That's a lot of people. How do you get to that number?
How are you going to be raising funds?
Well, for starters, I'm a big believer in, before I could even dare to ask the people of Tampa for their money, that I should prove that I'm in this race seriously. And so it starts with learning and making sure that my team can, like I said, ask those tough questions. And so the 90-man operation, it's a mix of experts. We have what we call the Tomorrow team. I'm incredibly excited about them. It's about 60 or so experts, all the way from civil litigation attorneys, previous city commissioners, tech lawyers. I mean, these guys are incredibly smart, and they're leveraging they're volunteering their insights to join my campaign.
Why?
I don't know. I would like to think it's because
I mean, you've met them over the years.
Of
so
course.
These are people you've sort of assembled as a team, and you've asked them like
a mix of both.
Yeah.
It's people who've come out of the woodworks and emailed in and say, I have this experience, and we vet them and we take a look at their profile. And I think as long as we have their insights, it doesn't. It's pragmatic to learn from them. And so having have people who we can on call ask these questions for has been really great.
Anybody who's run for mayor before on this?
Not that I'm aware of. Most of these people aren't necessarily politicians, but just career professionals who, in their work, have gained a lot of insights.
And I know in the past when I've asked you, you've said you're going to share names later. Has that changed? Can you share any names right now? Will you?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay.
But there are a lot of names that are joining in. We're working on sort of the best way to communicate their insights and the perspective that they bring. And I'm excited for them to introduce themselves to you guys over time.
Okay. Let me meander on this next question. Some of your views are out there on your Medium page,
Sure.
Specifically your thoughts on modular housing, the dissolved Police Citizens Review Board here in Tampa, and how you voted on the state amendments. But you started to share a little bit more about you at your announcement press conference a week ago today, actually, Joe Chalura Square there. I heard you say that beyond heartbreaking, seeing people have to sleep under bus shelters for warmth is unacceptable. You had a quote. You said, Tampa doesn't just end on Ashley Drive or Water Street. We have obligations to constituents from all around the city, from West Tampa to East Tampa, from the Channel District to New Tampa. Every neighborhood, every individual, every family, every person deserves to feel seen, valued, and supported by their city's government. And I would add to that, I think when we spoke after your initial email, I called you, you said, you don't believe Tampa should be run like a business. It should be run like a government. And I think part of where we missed the mark is all these investments in high-profile areas and the parts that make us a lot of money. You need to be investing in the people. I think the underlying goal of my campaign is to make sure that people of the city, not the 1%, but the 99%, are the ones we're paying our attention to the most. And I know when we first talked, you said you wanted your campaign to be positive, not necessarily focused on shortcomings of the current administration. But people want to hear your ideas, right? So thinking about that young Mayor Lipscomb, if I believe the history books, they were calling for better transportation. So during his time in office, he got new boat lines to come in, service support. There was a stagecoach line between Tampa and Gainesville. He paid for it by introducing fines for firing guns or starting a riot or disturbing the peace.
I wonder if that would work today.
I don't know. Not on the 4th of July. Will you explain how you think Tampa City government has treated or mistreated constituents who don't theoretically have that Ashley Drive or Water Street address?
Sure. I mean, like I said, I have immense respect for leadership in this space at all. You really do give up a lot, truly. And most of it is driven by a deep sense of purpose and mission. And so that's a respect I hold in the highest regard. Equally, though, I think sometimes when we channel resources into the wrong, well, maybe I shouldn't say wrong, but when we channel resources into areas that don't benefit a majority of constituents, you see that. And I get it in emails. I hear it when I talk to them. They're really fed up. And quite frankly, when I drive past like the transportation route and I see all those people sitting out here in the cold, I think to myself, how could we be this city, as amazing as we are, and have just such a glaring deficit in the way we treat people? And so I think that just realigning our focuses away from the pretty buildings and the skyscrapers, but towards the people, and making sure that this is really, truly a great place to live for them is an important thing for government to be doing.
You told me that after your announcement, just one elected official, Tampa City Councilman Luis Vieira, reached out to say good luck to you. That's very on brand for Councilman Vieira, by the way.
He's
a jovial person and always a gentleman. You're first out of the gate. Local folks who speculate on politics have tossed out names that we could see in this 2027 Tampa mayoral race. That includes Vieira, his fellow council member Bill Carlson, property appraiser Bob Henriquez has been tossed out there. County Commissioner Harry Cohen, Pat Camp, who you had dinner with.
Yes.
Two-term Tampa Mayor Bob Buckhorn has been tossed out there, and Sean Shaw has also been tossed out. What will pan out, we don't know.
Who's tossing this stuff out there, right?
It was Wendy March. I read a column by Wendy March in the Tampa Bay Times, who no longer is there now. He's at Florida Politics, I think. But if I'm going to believe anybody on Tampa politics, it's going to be Wendy. And Bill Carlson told Creative Loafing he would announce his plans later this year. Vieira told me he wasn't even thinking about that race because he's focused on recovery. We had Commissioner Harry Cohen here on the show over the summer. He told us that he thinks more about running for re-election to the county commission than he does about trying to be mayor of Tampa again. Sure. Councilwoman Lynn Hertek was just on Down and Dirty here before us. Some people have tossed her name out. I caught her on the bus randomly the other day, and she too said she hasn't even thought about whether she's going to run, even for her at-large seat in 2 years.
You randomly ride the bus?
Is it the new Heart One?
Since it's free, I started riding it to and from work because my home is just on the route. I can go down. My kid's school, actually, my kid wanted to take the bus yesterday, so we took the bus.
This is great.
It was great. He loved it. And I got like a 5-block walk with him twice. So it was good. But Lynn Hertek said all she wants to think about is what's good for the community right now, and that she doesn't like the way she feels when she puts herself in a place to think through that lens of future elections. So she wants her decision to be focused on the people right now. If this goes to plan, Alan, you will have done a lot of listening to people by the time others get in this race. What do you think your role is going to be in the mayoral race once you get in? Once they get in, do you think you can get them to talk outside of those safe vetted talking points and really get them to commit to these ideas that truly will have a positive impact on the 99%
absolutely.
that you alluded to?
If anything, what I hope is the most impactful element of my campaign is to make sure we're actually pointing our questions, really thoughtful, holistic questions, towards solutions for the people who really need us to be involved in what's going on locally. I think all the names that you mentioned would be incredibly pragmatic leaders for Tampa. I think the thing that ultimately separates us is what is our vision for the city and what's our leadership style. And for me, my leadership style is really clear. The standard for government is for the people. That's the way we'll operate, and that's the way we'll serve. Equally, I think our vision for the city is also relevant. Do we have a future, a plan for how do we make lives better here? And quite frankly, you look at some of the plans that have been developed over the years. My team, they brought me this. We looked at the transportation plans now, and I don't want to get too policy focused, but it's interesting. We had a tax law that they tried to implement that was shot down by the Supreme Court. Here in Hillsborough County. And it just kind of...
You're talking about all for transportation?
For transportation,
correct.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. And it was shot down as unconstitutional. And so it kind of begs the question, how do we get to these decisions? Where do they derive from? And what is the game plan to make sure that we're actually delivering on these and not just talking about it? And so if my campaign can do anything, it's hopefully going to shine a light on these really holistic questions we need to be asking.
And if you're just joining us on the Skinny, that voice you're hearing belongs to Alan Henderson, who last week became the first person to enter the 2027 Tampa mayoral race. If you want, you can call us at the studio, 813-239-9663. Send a text, 813-433-0885, or email.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
Just going to add on that, here's your chance. Look, 720 days away from the next Tampa mayoral election. If you want to talk to the guy who could be,
and who wants to be.
God willing.
And I hear a lot of people always gripe about leadership, right? So now's your chance to talk to him. And we want to get to this, too.
Questions.
We rattled off all those names, Alan, and most, if not all, are Democrats. And your race is obviously nonpartisan, but you are a registered Democrat, something you're not ashamed of. But you have told me that there are a lot of implications that come with just stating, this is my party affiliation, and that, which, some of those values, they might not truly resonate with particular views on one issue. Lewis from the LGBTQ plus Hillsborough Democrats was the only person, actually, from the party that I called who would go on the record for me. And he said that you will need the support of the party as far as canvassing, fundraising, connections. And he said Republicans will be getting into the mayoral race, too, which is notable. Obviously, this is a county stat, but in this county, there are only 2,232 more registered Democrats than Republicans. How entrenched are you willing to get in the party structure here, especially after attending some meetings?
I I mean, it's variable. Of course, we'll need the party's support, and I think a lot of my views will align with some of the important work that they've been doing historically. I think what's interesting is going to be where the priorities lie for Republicans that enter the race, and I hope it's on the people. Something that I thought was a really promising take is that good policy, good legislation is typically nonpartisan. And so my campaign is focused on data-centric solutions to the problems that we have. And quite frankly, as long as we're working off the same set of data, I imagine Republican, Democrat, all types of constituents will hopefully get behind some of the solutions we want to propose.
You're headed. I was just going to say. So you're headed soon to the Kennedy School at Harvard.
Yes.
How is that going to mesh with your campaign? That will require you staying in Cambridge, I'm sure, for a little while.
No. So I study remotely. That's a great question. I study remotely. The online element is I think a little bit easier than what they have to do in Massachusetts. But certainly the professors are all gifted, and it's been great to engage even with the students who, once I've told I'm running, who also want to be involved in the campaign. And so we're building a really astute team. I'm excited to put them to work and channel their insights here in Tampa.
Do you have a sense of whether that's something that you'll direct toward what you might be dealing with? Should you become mayor? I mean,
Absolutely.
This is sort of learning over during this program.
Yes, and that's why I decided to kind of build the team the way I have. We have three bubbles. We have the campaign staff, which is communications, deputy communications, associate policy development coordinators. Really, just focused roles. Then we have the Tomorrow team, which is the panel of experts, and like I said, they cross a vast range of different focuses, different disciplines. And then we have our volunteer network, our Team Tampa. In those, what I hope to do is demonstrate, one, my ability to lead. I'm not worried about leading a 90-person team. I think at the peak of my company, we had about 43 people.
Yeah, talk about your company, because you were in the Business Journal some years ago for an esports company.
Yes, so I founded an esports company back in high school. We started, my brother spoke to it at my announcement.
Roderick,
yes.
Yeah.
We started a GTA 5 police role play clan, super nerdy stuff. But it caught momentum. It did. And over the years, I grew out of the GTA stuff and transformed into an esports team. And even the ethos of that team has always been about how can we leverage the impact we do have to bring about transformation for the industry. And so, we've had the opportunity to work with brands like Champion and Disney. I was just telling my team about how surreal it was to talk with Logan Paul and just all the cool names that you can find when your focus is real positive impact for the space.
We're going to transition here soon, and I think we'll be talking to you soon. Has anybody been giving you grief about voting out of Precinct 859? Are they telling you to move into the city? How's that going?
It is, and I think when the conversation gets caught up on zip codes, we really lose an opportunity to have fresh perspective in the race. Of course, I'll make sure that I'm legally allowed to run, of course, but I've lived and worked in Tampa my whole life, and I love this city so much. And so while I respect, the position, it's certainly a pragmatic thing to ask. Does he live here? Can he even, be involved? The answer is a resounding yes, of course.
Is there anything you want to leave us with before we go?
I would hope that people, if you're listening and you're inspired by the opportunity for fresh perspective and leadership, that you would support my campaign. It's HendersonForTampa.org. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to. You
can say that.
Promote it.
You just can't say prices and stuff.
Oh, no, of course not. But HendersonForTampa.org. I'm really encouraged by the momentum and the positive reception we've seen so far, and I hope that it continues.
Alan Henderson, that's the voice you've been hearing there. Last week, he became the first person to enter the 2027 Tampa mayoral race. Thank you for being here, Alan. I really appreciate you taking the time. Of course. And feel free to hang out, too. Listen to the professor here. Let's stay in the city of Tampa, specifically Sulphur Springs, just 4 miles north of this radio station. Like I said, we don't talk about the cost of anything here, but this Sunday afternoon, our next guest, University of South Florida geography professor, Dr. Chris Mindell. He will be at Sulphur Springs Museum and Heritage Center at 2 p.m., for a talk about the Florida Springs subtitled Pumping Pollution, Policy and the Struggle for Truth. Dr. Mindell, thank you for being here. Are you with us today?
Oh, good to be with you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Mindell, your book, Florida Springs, From Geography to Politics and Restoration, was one of my favorite things that landed on the desk at Creative Loafing Tampa Bay last year. It's this dense work It's got information on the geographical makeup of the springs. It dives into their histories going back almost 1,000 years. The text is very fair, but it also doesn't dance around the fact that springs can be political. Parts of the book really do get into policy and the state of Florida's approach to quote-unquote restoration of these precious natural resources. And at the end of the day, in my view here, you land on these elusive truths as they are today, as we know them today, discovered by scientists and researchers. You're in the neighborhood this weekend, Sulphur Springs specifically, and for some Tampaños, whether they're newbies or natives, Sulphur Springs might not be more than something they've seen on a street sign. But your book has plenty about the Bay Area, from Lithia Springs, Eulalie Springs, even Purity Springs, not far from Sulphur Springs. Can you talk to our listeners about Sulphur Springs and why you, in the book, describe its story as truly tragic?
Oh, boy. Absolutely. In the early 20th century, Sulphur Springs was often referred to, and I think some of your listeners would know that it was referred to as the Coney Island of Florida. It was a magnificent place for recreation, drew big crowds of people and so forth, although I should point out big crowds of Caucasian people and not many others. Yeah. However, it was very...
What year are we talking about, sir?
You could go back, I would say 1920s. There's a photograph in the book, I think it's 1925, big crowd of people there. It was used maybe a little less before that, but by the 1920s, it was certainly a big deal.
Yeah, there's great postcards if you go on any digital commons, but specifically I'm thinking about the University of South Florida's great old postcards of Sulphur Springs, high dive platforms, people, as you said, it was segregated, enjoying the springs.
Commerce built around there?
Yeah, it was serviced by the streetcar. So these bathing crowds, they grew larger as the city expanded, as I understand from your book. But the sinkholes, something happened here. Can you talk to us a little bit about what happened as the city grew, Professor Mindell?
Yes, and this is common. Tampa is loaded with sinkholes. It has more than a couple of hundred of them, and some of them not that far away from Sulphur Springs. And of course, anytime it rains, city runoff goes down those sinkholes and makes its way pretty quickly in the direction of Sulphur Springs. And so by mid-century, people started to recognize people are getting sick. They're getting colds and other illnesses and so forth. And at first, I think there was a suggestion that perhaps it was due to leaky sewage pipes or septic tanks or things like that. But I think what scientists found was that it was really more tied to rainfall because there was a pulsating effect. Every now and again, there'd be excess bacteria, but then there would be less. Well, people don't stop going to the bathroom or only go to the bathroom when it rains. Mm-hmm. So they began to believe, okay, this can't be tied to just leaky sewage pipes. It has to be tied to rainfall and all of the junk that's going into these sinkholes that are ultimately connected to the spring. And because Florida is basically sitting on a, limestone version of Swiss cheese. And as water makes its way into the subsurface, it ultimately ends up coming out in places like Sulphur Springs. And obviously it became pretty clearly regularly contaminated that by, I think it was 1986, that the city basically said, we have to shut this down. This is a public health problem.
So people were still swimming. The public was still actually bathing in Sulphur Springs right up until 1986.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Isn't that crazy? And then they built a swimming pool there. But that now, too, is closed indefinitely while the old spring bathing space is fenced off and mottled with like this floating algae. We have a phone call here real quick. Let's get to it. David's been waiting. David, you're on the air with Dr. Mindell here.
Yeah, I was curious if y'all could talk a little bit about the influence of the dog track on Sulphur Springs. I don't know if y'all have been there recently, but the track itself is just fallen into real disrepair, and it's just kind of sad. I'd love to see that whole area be repurposed and made into something nicer than kind of the aging infrastructure that we got now. But just curious about your author's take on that, and maybe a little bit of history of how the dog track ended up there.
Okay.
Well, I think about this all the time as just in a larger sense as a point of like potential redevelopment in the city of Tampa.
Mm-hmm. It's been floated as a soccer stadium or something.
Huge park, the big area of land that is sort of fenced off that nobody actually uses as a park. North of there is the Kmart. We're talking about this whole Sulphur Springs area that sort of has a lot of potential.
Professor Mindale, how familiar are you with that track there, and how has it affected the health and development around Sulphur Springs?
I'm not 100% certain about that particular facility and its impact on the springs. Part of which is because, it's paved over. So it probably contributes runoff. Mm-hmm. The critical issue is what's making its way into the subsurface. And so even if there's some unused property and parking lot and so forth, that parking lot is not heavily used, right? So it's not like there's dripping oil from cars and things of that nature making its way into the subsurface right there, right now. I think the bigger concern is what's making its way into sinkholes and other places around Sulphur Springs, none of which is to say I like seeing the eyesore of the old dog track and unused parking area north of the spring. Of course not.
Yeah, we used to play hoop it up there. Yeah. That's how I remember it.
I like how you described this this sort of geology of the situation here. That Tampa's kind of built upon this limestone Swiss cheese, if you will, and the Florida aquifer flows through all of those cracks and crevices in the limestone. Is that also, number one, affected by the tide? And then the aquifer, I mean, does the tide sort of backwash into the aquifer? And then beyond that, how is that affected when people start to when bottled water companies start to draw water from the aquifer? How does that affect those springs and where how they flow?
Well, that's a good question. As it happens, Sulphur Springs is very near the transition zone between groundwater that is mostly salty. For example, out in Tampa Bay, the groundwater beneath Tampa Bay is salty. The groundwater beneath inland Florida is freshwater. Well, there's a transition zone, and it's not a hard line. It's sort of a mishmash, basically maybe closer in some cases to brackish groundwater. You're right in that as we draw more water out of the ground or away from Sulphur Springs for other purposes, that has led Sulphur Springs' salinity level to increase significantly over the past century. Used to be in the early 20th century, it was always a little bit more salty than many Florida springs, with about 200 parts per million salt, but now it's over 1,500 parts per million. I would caution against blaming that on drawing water out for bottled water. Much more likely is the fact that we take water that would normally come out of Sulphur Springs and send it up to help support the Hillsborough River right below the dam. Because during the dry season, Tampa needs all of the water in that reservoir, in many cases, doesn't have enough water to release any beyond the dam. So they take water that ordinarily would have come up in Sulphur Springs and pump it to the base of the dam so that it can support that portion of the Hillsborough River just below the dam.
I had no idea that was the case. Did you know this, Ray?
I didn't know that.
How much? So, do you know how much? What's that flow? How much water gets pumped up? Is that a constant thing, or is there?
I was just reading not long ago. I think they're authorized to pump up to 18 cubic feet per second. That's a lot of gallons of water. And when that happens, when they take that much water, then that reduces the pressure underneath the spring, and it allows that transition zone between the salty groundwater beneath the bay and the fresh groundwater beneath inland Florida to move in an inland direction. And we're pretty confident that that's what's happening beneath Sulphur Springs.
And I love this talk right now. Oh, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was going to say, theoretically, what would happen if they just stopped drawing water off the spring, off that spring in particular?
If they did, then the rains that typically replenish the aquifer might create enough pressure to push that transition zone back towards the Gulf, and Sulphur Spring might become fresher over time. But then where would the water come from to help support the ailing Hillsborough River right beneath the dam? Wow. There's a mad scramble to find such water, and that water might be closer than you think. Tampa has tried for years to use highly treated wastewater.
Right.
Some people call it toilet to tap. I think it got a new name this last time. And that's interesting because that's another angle of that policy that has always been controversial in town. But the water crisis is real, I like this talk here because we're talking about things that and we're talking about science. And part of your talk this weekend is the title is Struggle for Truth. And I think in some parts of the state where springs are siphoned for drinking water, as we talked to, companies like Nestle and Zephyr Hills, those struggles are more explicit. Could you elaborate on that in the context of Sulphur Springs at all, historically or in relation to springs across our region and state? Is the truth or what do we want to call the absence of truth, Ben? Lies being weaponized in the context of our springs right now?
Oh boy, as pertains to bottled water, look, I would be in favor of assessing water bottlers a modest fee, just like we do oil companies, right? To allow them the privilege, to take that public resource and use it for private gain. So the fact that we don't angers many people. Well, they're taking our water. And yeah, that's true, but they're not taking very much. And that's the real issue. There are a couple of places, for instance, on Santa Fe River, the Santa Fe River doesn't have enough water flowing in it to begin with. So taking spring flow that would otherwise contribute to the Santa Fe River up near Gainesville is a problem. In our region, a fair bit less of a problem. They're not taking nearly as much as many other users. The public utilities, agriculture generally are all taking way more water than the water bottlers. So on the one hand, I might say I wish water bottlers would pay for the resource they take and use for private gain. On the other hand, I'll defend them much of the time anyway, and say that in many cases, there are other users who are taking far more water than they are.
And if you're just joining us on the Skinny right now, that voice you're hearing belongs to University of South Florida geography professor, Dr. Chris Mindell. He's the author of a great 2024 book, Florida Springs, From Geography to Politics and Restoration. And he's speaking on Sunday at Tampa's Sulphur Springs Museum and Heritage Center. We've got a lot of calls coming in, 813-239-9663. You can text us 813-433-0885 or send us an email at dj@wmnf.org. We have one text message here.
I got a quick question.
Okay.
If you want to check out this text message we're getting first. I was going to ask, Oh, I'm just seized by this idea. So I was at Sulphur Springs just yesterday on the canoe with my daughter, Morrissey, and her friend Marley. And there were maybe a dozen manatee hanging out right there at the mouth of Sulphur Spring. The water appeared incredibly clear, and I don't know if that's normal for this time of year or if it had something to do with the weather or what, but just very clear water. It looks so nicer than the spring, I think, has looked in a long time. And I'm seized by this idea that if we weren't sucking water up to feed the upper Hillsborough, well, it's not really the upper Hillsborough, but the Hillsborough up by the dam, how many manatees might be? I mean, would that look like Three Sisters? Yeah, where there are hundreds of manatees parked in the river. Do you know, Professor?
There might be there will certainly be a few that are attracted to that spring because the manatees are craving water that's a little bit warmer. When it gets down into the 30s, they can't tolerate that. They can't tolerate water that dips below 68 degrees Fahrenheit for very long. Mm-hmm. And since most Florida springs produce water that's about 72 degrees, sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but we're talking only a degree or two. That is the difference between manatees suffering hypothermia and not. You're right that the more water that comes out of Sulphur Springs, that's more heat energy too. Yeah. And so I do think it is likely that more manatees would become attracted. Would we be manatee central, like up at Three Sisters in Citrus County? I don't know about that, but I do know that in several other springs around Florida, water management districts have designed minimum flow and levels for the specific purpose of accommodating more manatees who need help during the winter. You can imagine the problem that would be caused when power plants that normally attract lots of manatees, right? Because mm-hmm. they're releasing lots of warm water that is actually wastewater, but the manatees like it. But when those things go down for any length of time, the manatees don't understand what's going on, so they continue to wait.
Yeah.
And for warm water that may never get there. So that makes springs really important resources for manatee conservation.
And we lost Gary from Philadelphia on the phone there, but we have a text here from Bubba. He says, what does your guest think about failed springs like Kissingen Springs and Bartow? Could Sulphur Springs suffer a similar fate over time? I'm not familiar with Kissingen Springs.
Kissingen Spring is sort of it's in Polk County, or was in Polk County, a few miles south of Bartow. And it's the poster child for what can happen in an unregulated groundwater pumping environment. In the early 20th century, Kissingen Spring was maybe not quite as popular as Sulphur Springs, but it was locally popular and you can imagine in the early 20th century with no air conditioning, with cool water coming out of the ground, it was a great place to cool off and all of that. But as phosphate mining became a big deal, and a significant source of decent paying jobs, that process, phosphate mining, also calls for the extraction of huge quantities of groundwater. Mm-hmm. And that reduced the water table below what was necessary to support Kissingen Springs. So now Kissingen Springs really is no more. It's just part of the landscape, and there's almost never any water in it. I mean, maybe during a hurricane like we just had a couple of months ago, where there's a tremendous amount of water suddenly making its way into the aquifer, maybe the groundwater table is sufficient to cause some water to flush through Kissingen. But with that exception, not so much anymore. That groundwater table has been lowered to the point where it doesn't flow anymore. Well, could that happen to Sulphur Springs? I don't think so, partly because Sulphur Springs is now in a more tightly regulated environment. It's not perfect. There are all kinds of water quality problems there, but there is a minimum flow and level that is expected to be met and probably will be met for the foreseeable future. We can argue about whether more water should be allowed to course through Sulphur Springs, but I don't think they're going to let what happened to Kissingen happen to Sulphur Springs here in Tampa.
So Sulphur Springs, of course, isn't the only spring to feed the Hillsborough River. There are quite a few of them, including Purity Springs, which you bring up in the book. I love Purity Springs primarily
one of my favorites.
Because, you know, the sign says no swimming, but if you take your shoes off, you can wait around. Once in a while, you got to look out for broken glass or whatever. But Santa, you know, there's sometimes some like fruit baskets left out there for it's part of some ceremony.
It's a park. It's a spring in the middle of a neighborhood. It's really wild.
I wonder if those springs are those thought of as a kind of a system of springs that feed a particular river in this, like the Hillsborough in this case?
Absolutely. And in fact, there are a handful of springs that support the Hillsborough River. And of course,
how many?
We were talking about Crystal Springs. I would say maybe if you looked at all of them, maybe about a dozen. If you were to go to a river like Swanee River up in North Florida, I mean, look at a map of Florida Springs. They look like they're beads on a string.
Right.
The Swanee is supported by at least a couple of hundred springs,
right,
but the Hillsborough a little bit less so. The most significant contributors to Hillsborough flow, though, are those in southern Pasco County at Crystal Springs. They support the bulk of the spring flow that makes its way into Hillsborough River.
Is that part of the Green Swamp?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Which is the source of 4 Florida rivers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's absolutely right. A long time ago, before we manipulated the landscape, the Green Swamp fed not only the Hillsborough, but the Withlacoochee, the Peace, and the Ocklawaha. We've created a lot of challenges in terms of the flow of water across the landscape. But we at least have done a reasonably good job of trying to minimize development in the Green Swamp so that at least the water that falls onto that landscape can make its way through Florida's Swiss cheese geology to support springs like Crystal Springs that feed directly into the Hillsborough River.
If you could click back to the early 20th century, is there anything you would do differently in terms of the way Tampa was built to mediate the impact of the springs, to make that river healthier, you know?
Oh boy. We have this, and we saw with tragic consequence this past hurricane season, what can happen with our love affair with water. All of us love the water, love seeing the water, love being near the water, love living near the water. But it's a problem because it doesn't always stay where we think it should stay. As we saw during the most recent hurricane season, storm surge washing over barrier islands, putting several feet of water into people's houses. It was terrible. The same thing is true for Hillsborough River. By building so close to Hillsborough River, all of that stuff that we put on the landscape, whether it is fertilizer, some of which goes into the ground, some of which just washes off the surface into the river, our pet waste from animals, and all species of junk make their way into the river. So if I could turn back time, I would probably try to keep people further away from the river, give the landscape a chance to process some of that waste before it reaches the river, so the river stays in better shape.
Our listeners are probably picking up on this, but you're a geographer. You live in this world and this tradition of the interaction between humans and the environment, and you're huge on the management of the environment, specifically the space between science and policy. And obviously, your specialty is in the state's springs, lakes, rivers, and wetlands. But it's hard with these fires going on. Everybody becomes like an expert on the natural world and things like that. And we start talking about climate and science again. When you think about Florida Springs, Dr. Mindell, and the policy around it right now, how optimistic are you that our children, grandchildren, or maybe even great-grandchildren will be able to experience this magic and this allure that is being surrounded by spring water, diving in it, being around the wildlife in it?
I think we probably will have springs with us for a long time, because I do think that the water management districts are paying attention and they are trying. Now, others would probably say, well, they're not trying hard enough. Some of that is Florida water law that probably should be changed to better care for water resources in this state. But it's not like we have zero tools. And so those tools will probably keep those springs going. The issue might be that over time, they might, and they are, becoming slowly, in most cases slowly, in some cases it's spectacularly fast, but in many other cases, water quality and spring flows are slowly degrading, so that we have to wrestle with something called the shifting baseline syndrome. If you were to take people who've never been to a Florida spring and take them to springs, whether it's Crystal Springs in Pasco County or Itchtuckney Springs up in North Florida, it's hard to imagine people not falling in love with these water bodies. Yeah. They're beautiful.
Me and Ray are like, yeah.
I'm considering just driving up there to run the 10K that they have later on.
We call it Itch Me, Touch Me.
and we got a text from Bubba. He says he loves Unpurity Springs. We're getting close to time here, Dr. Mindell. I think you are going to be at the Florida Springs Council Summit in Gulfport next month. How comfortable do you feel speaking quickly about the Florida Spring Council taking Florida's so-called Department of Environmental Protection to court over these failures to enact rules to protect the springs?
Well, somebody has to do something. I for the life of me, I do understand. I mean, the bottom line is Department of Environmental Protection has lots of well-meaning people, but they are controlled by the governor's office, and they are not doing what Florida law tells them to do. And so I know we live in an environment where lawsuits happen left and right, but at the end of the day, sometimes that's what it takes to get agencies or political figures' attention and to get them to do the right thing.
And I don't know if you can squeeze this in 30 seconds, but as I said, your book doesn't really dodge the politics of the springs, considering how things are going in public education in the state. Do you ever worry that your work will land you in hot water with your state employer?
I've sort of thought about that with the politicization of education generally. But at the end of the day, I'd like to think that that truth wins. And if you're basing your narrative on facts, then it's hard to argue with facts. John Adams, our second president, remember the famous quote, "Facts are stubborn things." That's an important issue. And so as long as we're not playing games with politics or playing political games, as long as we're grounding our stories about springs or anything else in facts, then I feel reasonably supported in that regard.
That's the voice of University of South Florida geography professor, Dr. Chris Mindell. He's the author of Florida Springs, From Geography to Politics and Restoration. He's speaking on Sunday at Tampa's Sulphur Springs Museum and Heritage Center. We will link to that in the blog online. I know I haven't been great at it the last 2 weeks, but my blog's pretty much ready, and the links will be there. Dr. Mindell, thank you so much for joining us today.
And thanks for sending us off with such an inspiring
That was great.
note. Facts matter.
And thank you for listening to WMNF Tampa. To all our listeners, thank you to Alan Henderson for coming on in the top of the show. Thanks to all the callers. My name is Ray Roa.
I'm Ben Montgomery.
Mitch Prey, I think, is back next week. On behalf of myself, Ben, Skip Sassy on the boards, Irene Matthews on the phone, thank you so much for listening to WMNF Tampa and the Skinny. Art in Your Ear is next. Joellen Schilke, the hostess who loves you with the mostest, is in Studio One. I saw her, I swear.
Yeah.
It's dark in there, but I'm very excited to listen to that.
Stay warm. Go see those manatees.
Go see those manatees.
Sulphur Springs, they're out there.
And have a good weekend.